the bluebird. They were 25 and in love, the kind of love that makes you believe in fate. Her name was Blue, yes, like the color, and he was Henry Bird. From the moment they met, he called her his bluebird. It was ridiculous, honestly, whimsical and saccharine, and she used to roll her eyes every time he said it. But it stuck, and so did he. Their romance was a whirlwind of late-night drives, handwritten notes, and promises whispered in the dark. Everyone said they were that couple, meant to be, forever and always. But forever is a long time, especially when betrayal drips like water from a leaky faucet. 20 years later, the love was gone. Her strength had been slowly siphoned off, year after year, affair after affair, until all that was left of Blue was a bitter, hollowed-out woman of 45, the kind who carried her heartbreak like a scar across her smile. The twin children, her pride, her light, had grown up and gone off to university. They were thriving, full of hope and potential, far from the crumbling marriage that had once been their home. And that was when it hit her. There was nothing tethering her to this life anymore, nothing but the familiar weight of disappointment. The final straw came on a Tuesday morning, as mundane as any other. She was in the kitchen making coffee when she overheard Henry on the phone, laughing, flirting. He thought she wasn't home. She wasn't supposed to be. But there he was, calling someone his Jay Bird, a blonde, tattooed little thing named Jay. Blue knew about her. Of course she did. Jay wasn't the first, just the most brazen. But hearing him recycle the nickname, the one that used to be hers, was something else. It was cruel. It was mocking. And it was enough. That night she walked out and didn't look back. The divorce was swift and merciless. Henry had money, charm, and a good lawyer. Blue had a career of her own, steadily built in the cracks of her broken marriage, and the court decided that was enough. No alimony. The judge said she had condoned the infidelity by staying all these years. Her children were adults, and the marriage was deemed too far gone to warrant further compensation. But she got the house where she'd folded laundry with tears in her eyes, the house where she'd hosted birthdays and burned dinners and cried behind closed doors, the house where she lost pieces of herself for 2 decades. It felt less like a win and more like a cruel consolation prize. She sold it within the month. There was no grand plan, no mapped-out next step, just a need to breathe again, to be somewhere Henry had never touched, somewhere she could hear her own thoughts without the echo of past arguments bouncing off the walls. She packed what she needed and left the state entirely, driving with no destination in mind, until she found herself in a quiet, rural town that didn't know her name. A town with dirt roads and wildflowers, where neighbors waved just because they could, and silence didn't feel heavy. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't even particularly pretty, but it was peaceful. And for the first time in 20 years, peace was more precious than anything money could buy. Blue didn't know what the next chapter would hold. She wasn't sure she believed in fresh starts or second chances. Not yet, but she was finally away from the man who broke her, away from the life that had swallowed her whole. And that in itself was a beginning, because even broken wings can remember how to fly. Blue chose the smallest of the 3 hotels in town, a charming little bed and breakfast with lace curtains, creaky floors, and a fresh pie set out every afternoon. To anyone else, it would have felt like stepping into a storybook. To Blue, it felt like a cage with floral wallpaper. The hostess, a sunny woman named May in her late 60s, greeted her with a wide smile and arms too open for Blue's taste. May called her sweetheart and offered her chamomile tea before she even dropped her bags. Blue winced. "I don't need tea," she snapped, voice sharp enough to silence the little bell over the door. "I just need a room, quiet, clean, and without interruptions." May blinked, but kept smiling, like she'd seen worse from city folks passing through. "Of course, dear. Room 3 upstairs. You'll like the view." Blue didn't look at the view. She kept the curtains drawn. Her first morning in town, she wandered into the only open cafe, a place called the Humming Bean. It was cozy, homemade, and wildly unpolished. The waitress, a bubbly 20-something named Tara, greeted her with a cheerful, "Hey girl, sit wherever you like." Blue's lip curled before she could stop it. "Do I look like a girl to you?" Tara flushed, but shrugged it off with practiced grace. "My bad? Coffee?" Blue nodded stiffly. Everything felt too familiar, too warm, too casual. She missed structure. She missed polish. She missed the person she'd become in her efforts to be untouchable, flawless, polished, invulnerable. Because for 20 years she'd convinced herself that perfection was protection. If she looked perfect, worked perfectly, kept the house perfect, maybe Henry would stop needing women who were messy, wild, and alive. Maybe he'd see that his blue bird had become something better than all of them. But now, that armor was cracking. Her work, once a point of pride, had followed her to this new life, but not without friction. She had asked for flexibility, then demanded it. She'd insisted she could be just as efficient from a distance, even though the spotty Wi-Fi in the Band B proved her wrong again and again. Deadlines slipped through her fingers. Video calls dropped mid-sentence. Files failed to upload. And when her boss, normally patient, even-keeled, asked if she could come into the city for a crucial meeting, she exploded. "Do you have any idea what I've been through?" she barked over the phone. "You think I can just uproot myself again because your calendar says so?" He was quiet for a moment before he replied. "I understand that your life's changed, Blue, but so has the company's. That client you missed last week, they pulled their contract. That was a 6-figure deal. I can't justify keeping you on." Just like that, it was over. Her voice, once a force in conference rooms and board calls, had finally talked her out of a job. She sat alone in room 3 that night, the silence heavier than it had ever been, her laptop dark beside her. The pie May had left on the hallway table sat untouched. Somewhere downstairs, someone laughed softly, and Blue hated how much it hurt to hear happiness that wasn't hers. Everything she had built, her marriage, her reputation, her career, was gone. Not in a blaze of glory, but in slow, silent collapses. And yet, outside her shuttered window, the stars over the town didn't seem to care. They blinked down without judgment, without expectation. It would be weeks before Blue opened the curtains again. But that night, she sat on the edge of the bed and whispered a truth she hadn't let herself feel until then. "I don't know who I am without the fight." Blue vanished into room 3 like a ghost. For days, she didn't leave. She let the pie on the hallway table go stale. She stopped answering calls, stopped brushing her hair. Depression crept in like fog under the door, slow, heavy, and impossible to ignore. She slept too much, then not at all. She stared at her laptop without opening it. She cried at the smell of clean sheets. Sometimes she felt nothing at all. The days melted together. Breakfasts passed without her. Afternoons slipped into darkness before she remembered to eat. Her bank account was dwindling fast, barely enough to cover another week at the Band B. All she had left was the savings from the house sale, and that money, she couldn't touch it. It felt tainted, earned through pain and compromise, stained with Henry's broken promises and a judge's cold verdict. That money was part of a life she wanted to bury. But pride doesn't pay for pie, and shame doesn't cover rent. When the Band B bill came due again, she folded the paper in half, then quarters, then eighths. She pressed it flat with shaking hands and walked down the creaky stairs, pride tucked into her back pocket like a withered leaf. May was in the parlor arranging flowers when Blue appeared in the doorway. The older woman looked up, surprised, but not unkindly. "I can't pay for another week," Blue said, voice thin. "Not unless I dip into the house money. And I can't. I won't." She took a breath, then forced the next words through her teeth. "But I'm willing to work, for room and board." May paused for a long moment. Her hands rested lightly on the vase, her eyes scanning Blue's face as if reading a hidden line between the bitterness and the plea. "You cook?" May asked, simple and direct. "Yes." "You clean?" "Yes." "You can stop biting my head off long enough to speak to guests?" Blue hesitated. "I can try." May smiled softly. "Good enough." Her room was changed that afternoon. Room 3, the one with the view, the soft bed, the illusion of dignity, was handed over to a paying guest. Blue was given a smaller room at the back of the house, no view, a twin bed, a small window that looked out onto a patch of gravel and weeds. The sheets smelled of lavender, but it still felt like exile. She scrubbed kitchen counters, bleached bathrooms, changed linens, and peeled potatoes. May had rules, lots of them, and a sharp eye for detail. Blue had been a boss once. Now she was being bossed, and every now and then the old venom would slip out. One morning, Tara, the same cheerful waitress from the cafe who now helped at the Band B part-time, offered her a coffee with a wink. "Careful," she joked. "It's strong enough to wake the dead." Blue's smile was a sneer before she could stop it. "Well, that explains why you're still asleep at the register half the time." The silence that followed was long and heavy. May appeared in the doorway. "Apologize." Blue blinked. "I said apologize, Blue. We don't speak to people that way in this house." Blue flushed with heat. Shame, defensiveness, old habits rising like steam. But she swallowed her pride and turned to Tara. "I'm sorry. That was uncalled for." Tara just gave a little shrug, like she'd already decided Blue was hurting more than she was hateful. "No biggie. Try again tomorrow." Blue nodded and turned back to her work, her throat tight. She spent the next week eating humble pie with every meal, apologizing for little slights, catching herself mid-snap, relearning the rhythm of civility, not as a performance, but as a survival skill. There were no luxuries now, just chores and second chances. But beneath the humiliation, something new was forming. Not peace, not yet, but maybe humility. Maybe even a kind of strange, gritty grace. And in the quiet corners of her tiny new room, Blue began to wonder, if she could survive this, what else might be possible? "It's okay, try again tomorrow." Tara had said it with a smile, all lightness and no malice. But the words had burrowed into Blue's chest and refused to leave. She repeated them silently while folding sheets, scrubbing baseboards, wiping down teacups. "Try again tomorrow." At first, they felt like pity, a pat on the head. But over time, they became something else. A kind of permission. Permission to be flawed, to fail, to begin again. Something Blue had never allowed herself. One evening, after her chores were done, Blue sat on the narrow bed in her tiny back room and opened an old notebook she'd found in the Band B's forgotten drawer. She didn't know what she meant to write. She only knew she needed to. She wrote about the day, the work, the mistakes, the small victories. She wrote about May and her sharp looks, Tara and her too kind forgiveness. But mostly, she wrote about herself. And eventually, the truth began to spill out. She realized she was mean to Tara because Tara reminded her of them. The women over the years, young, pretty, laughing too loud, too carefree. The women Henry had wanted. The women he had chosen, over and over again. Tara didn't deserve her bitterness, but Blue hadn't known where else to put it. She had carried so much hate for so long, for Henry, for the women, but most of all for herself, for staying, for swallowing betrayal for 2 decades and pretending it tasted like dignity, for believing that if she just became perfect enough, he'd stop looking elsewhere. And now, in the silence of her small room, she began to write all of it down. Each day, she journaled, not to make sense of it all, at least not at first, but simply to let it out. It was messy, angry, raw, but it was hers, and slowly something shifted. May noticed it before Blue did. "You're not biting anyone's head off today," May said one morning while slicing peaches for breakfast. Blue glanced up from setting the table. "Not yet," May chuckled. "Progress." Over time, their conversations deepened. One evening, after the last guest had gone to bed and the dishes were done, they shared a pot of chamomile tea at the kitchen table. May's nightly ritual. "You're not the first woman to rebuild here," May said quietly, watching the steam curl from her mug. Blue raised an eyebrow. "You?" May nodded. "Married young, thought he was the moon and stars. Turned out he was just a man, an angry one. He cheated, hit me once. I left him the next day." Blue blinked. "Just like that?" "Just like that," May said. "I had this house. No job, no plan, but I turned it into something. A place where broken things could rest a while." Blue looked around at the cozy kitchen, the warm lights, the mismatched chairs, the pie cooling on the sill, and saw it differently now. "I stayed," she whispered. "For years. I knew, and I stayed." May didn't flinch. "That was your way of surviving, until it wasn't." Blue looked down at her hands. "I hate that I let it go on, that I made myself small to make him love me." "Then stop making yourself small now," May said. "You got out, that counts. Now build something new. Doesn't matter how small you start." That night, Blue wrote those words down in her journal. "You got out, that counts." She began writing every morning before work, every night before bed. Pages filled with memory, grief, clarity, and sometimes hope. She started noticing things. How May always left the kitchen window cracked. How Tara always wore mismatched socks. how the wind smelled like wild mint after rain. She began laughing, just a little. She made friends, not many, but enough. People in the town began to see her not as the bitter stranger in the back room, but as someone changing, softening, someone human. She wasn't healed, not yet, but she was healing. And for the first time in a long, long time, Blue believed that maybe, just maybe, tomorrow could be better than today. May fell ill in early spring. It started with fatigue, then the cough, then the shaking hands that couldn't quite grip the tea kettle like they used to. At first, she brushed it off, blaming the cold or her age. But when she fainted in the garden one morning, Blue insisted she see a doctor. The diagnosis wasn't terminal, but it was a turning point. May, at nearly 70, had been running the bed and breakfast for 40 years. Her body, she said, was telling her it was time to live differently. "I've spent my whole life in this house," she told Blue one soft afternoon as they sat on the porch, the sun just beginning to dip below the trees. "I want to see the world before it's too late. Italy, Morocco, maybe even Japan." Blue looked at her, startled. "You've never even left the state." May laughed, wheezing slightly. "I know, that's the problem." They had become close, the two of them. Shared history, shared silence, 1,000 cups of tea. After 2 years of working side by side, their friendship had deepened into something like family. May turned to her. "I want you to take the band B." Blue's heart skipped. "What?" "You've helped grow it. The new retreat package, the renovations, the garden cafe idea, all yours. You know this place. You love it. But I've never. You've already been running it, Blue. I've just been watching." The sale was quiet, uncomplicated. May offered it for less than it was worth. "Consider it a thank you for not burning the place down those first few months," she joked, and Blue used part of her house sale savings finally to accept the gift. When May left for her first cruise, a 3-month journey through the Mediterranean, Blue stood on the porch and waved until the bus disappeared down the gravel road. Then she turned to face the house, now hers, and felt something she hadn't in years: terror. She was in charge, with only Tara, now a full-time staffer, for help. The retreat packages were launching. The ad campaign was live. Guests were arriving in droves. She barely slept, but she was proud. The Band B, now renamed the Blue May, was thriving. It was Tara who first noticed the guest. He arrived on a Thursday, checked in with a briefcase and a duffel bag, asking only for peace, Wi-Fi, and a decent cup of tea. His name was Jeremy McAnthony, and he had booked a weekend stay to unplug just enough. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and effortlessly handsome in a quiet, confident way. His salt and pepper hair was swept back from a warm face lined with laughter and loss. His eyes were a deep hazel that crinkled when he smiled, and they often landed on Blue. "Someone's smitten," Tara whispered as they refilled the breakfast tray. Blue scoffed. "He's a guest." "He's a handsome guest," Tara grinned. "And you've been blushing like a schoolgirl since he asked if you'd baked the lemon muffins." "I did bake the lemon muffins," Blue muttered. "Exactly." Blue tried to ignore it, but it wasn't easy. Jeremy wasn't loud or showy. He didn't flirt. He just noticed. Noticed when she switched the flowers in the lobby. Noticed when her hair was tied back in a red scarf. Noticed when she looked tired and always asked if she'd eaten. He stayed an extra week. Then another. He said he worked remotely. He was a freelance financial analyst and found the quiet excellent for focus. But he often chose to work in the sunroom where Blue passed through, always offering him more tea than strictly necessary. They talked about everything. "I lost my wife 4 years ago," he told her one night as they walked in the garden. "Breast cancer. She was my best friend." Blue swallowed, her throat tight. "I'm so sorry." "She would have liked you," he said simply. Something about the way he said it, gentle, honest, without pressure, stirred something deep in Blue. She had spent so long being second best, being used, being betrayed. Jeremy offered nothing but presence. And that was more seductive than any compliment. Tara teased her daily. "You're glowing," she said one morning, "like you swallowed the sunrise." Blue rolled her eyes but said nothing. She had changed. The pinched look that had hardened her features after the divorce was gone. Her skin was brighter, her posture looser. Rest, kindness, and purpose had worked quietly on her. And now Jeremy's presence was adding something new. the possibility of love. One evening, as a storm rolled in and guests curled up with books and wine, Jeremy asked if he could join her in the kitchen. She nodded, and they prepared dinner together, laughing as he clumsily peeled carrots and she corrected his chopping. As they sat down to eat, he looked at her and said, "You've made something beautiful here." She blinked. "It wasn't all me. May started it. Tara." "No," he said softly, "you turned it into something alive." And in that moment, Blue realized something. She wasn't the bitter, broken woman who had arrived 2 years ago. She was the woman who had taken heartbreak and built something healing from it, who had started over even when she didn't think she could. Later that night, as rain tapped the windows and the air smelled of thyme and lavender, Jeremy kissed her. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't desperate. It was the kind of kiss that said, "I see you. All of you." And for the first time in her life, Blue didn't flinch. The wedding took place under a sky that seemed painted for the moment, lavender and coral hues melting into deep blue as the sun set over the gentle hills. Fairy lights draped through the old oak tree behind the blue may cast a warm golden glow over the guests gathered below. It was intimate and soft, just like the love that had grown between Blue and Jeremy, quiet, steady, and deeply earned. Blue wore a flowing, pale blue dress that shimmered slightly in the evening light. Her dark hair, streaked now with dignified silver, was pinned up with wildflowers. She looked radiant, more than beautiful, alive. Jeremy waited under the tree with a patient, loving gaze, his suit simple and perfectly him. They didn't need grand gestures. Their entire love story was a testament to second chances and starting over. May was there, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief that had seen more weddings than one could count. She sat proudly in the front row, smiling at the woman who had once arrived at her inn, bitter and lost, and who now stood before her transformed. Blue's twin children had come back for the wedding, recently graduated and eager to start their new lives. They stood by their mother's side, offering quiet smiles of encouragement. They had seen the worst of her pain, and now they witnessed her joy. Jeremy's 2 adult children were there too, kind, respectful, both pleased that their father, with so much love to give, had found someone else to pour his heart into. The ceremony was short and heartfelt. Vows were spoken with tears and laughter, promises made not in youthful naivety, but in full awareness of life's storms. They toasted under the stars, dancing on the grass barefoot by the end of the night. Love, in all its mature, weathered glory, filled the air. Weeks later, Jeremy bought a small stone cottage just down the road from the Blue May. It had a white picket fence, a shady garden, and a sunroom where Blue would later sit and journal in the mornings. They moved in together quietly, building a rhythm of shared peace. The years passed gently, 10 of them, and at 57, Blue looked not just youthful, but luminous. Her hair was long again, vibrant in its streaks of silver and black. Her skin glowed from good rest, clean air, and peace of mind. Her smile was easy. Her laugh, no longer rare, echoed through the garden regularly. She and Jeremy traveled often now, visiting places they'd only dreamed of. That summer, they chose Lisbon, a sun-washed city of mosaic tiles and soulful music. They walked the steep cobbled streets hand in hand, pausing often to admire the view, sip wine, or take pictures of stray cats lounging in doorways. It was a city for lovers, and they felt like just that. Lovers who had found each other not at the beginning, but in the sweetest middle of life. On their last evening, they strolled along the riverfront, a breeze carrying the scent of salt and grilled sardines from nearby cafes. The sky was golden. Blue wore a linen dress and sandals, her eyes bright, her laugh frequent. Jeremy reached for her hand just as a familiar voice called out behind them. "Blue?" She froze, the sound slicing through the warm air like a cold wind. She turned. There he stood, Henry. He was also 57, but he looked far older. His face was bloated, skin dull, shoulders slouched. The years had not been kind. His hair had thinned drastically, and his body sagged with the weight of a life misspent. On his arm clung a woman half his age with overly bleached hair, exaggerated curves, long fake lashes, and an expression of disinterest even as she pawed at his sleeve. "Blue?" he said again, taking a step forward. "It is you." Jeremy instinctively stepped closer to her, placing a protective hand on the small of her back. Henry blinked, clearly stunned. You look amazing. Blue offered a cool smile. Hello, Henry. His eyes darted to Jeremy, then back to her. I didn't expect to see you here. You look happy. I am. He scratched the back of his head, trying to smooth the little hair he had left, as though trying to impress her. His voice lowered. Listen, I've thought about you. About everything. I just... Hen. The woman beside him interrupted in a nasal whine, tugging on his arm. Are we leaving or what? I'm starving. Henry hesitated. His eyes pleaded for another minute, for some closure, but Blue had none to offer. She looked him over once more, not with anger, not even pity, but detachment. Whatever string that had once connected them had long since unraveled. I hope you find what you're looking for, she said gently. And with that, she turned, her hand finding Jeremy's. They walked away together, her head high, his steps steady beside hers. When they were far enough, Jeremy whispered, You okay? She smiled, leaning into him. Better than I've ever been. And she meant it, because Blue had built something real, not just the Blue May retreat, not just a love story, but a life. A whole, radiant, unshakable life, one that Henry, in all his regret and decay, could only glimpse and never touch again. May passed on a still autumn morning, her garden bright with the last burst of marigolds and chrysanthemums. She died in her sleep, just as she had always wished, peacefully in her own bed with the wind rustling through the old lace curtains. Blue found her, hands folded, eyes closed, a soft smile still on her face, as if dreaming of someplace warm and full of light. The town mourned. Guests returned just to lay flowers by the gate. Tara baked May's favorite cinnamon rolls and placed them on the breakfast table with a single candle. Blue spoke at the memorial beneath the same oak tree where she had married Jeremy. She saved me, she said simply, and then she gave me the space to save myself. Years passed quietly, filled with purpose and warmth. Jeremy remained her anchor, steady and full of wonder for the world, even as his health began to falter. They traveled less, walked slower, but their home was filled with laughter and quiet conversations over tea and crossword puzzles. One morning, while Blue was out in the garden, her phone rang. Hi, Mom, she heard her son say. I just wanted to give you some news. Blue straightened attentively. There was always something new happening with her children and grandchildren. We thought you should know. Daddy died yesterday. He had a heart attack. We'll arrange the cremation. You don't have to bother coming. We won't have a funeral service. The call ended there, like a door closing. She waded through her emotions and feelings to see if there was any grief, any regret, but she felt nothing. Too much time had passed, too much life. She was a different person now, but she felt sorry for Henry. He had never found it, whatever it was that he had chased all his life. It had eluded him till the very end, and he had died ignobly of an overdose in a small, shabby apartment in Queens that he shared with his current fling. He did not leave a will, but he had nothing left to his name anyway. Blue began reading through her journals, volumes she had filled over the years with thoughts, reflections, conversations with May, meditations on healing and forgiveness. The words surprised her, full of clarity, tenderness, insight. She remembered how writing had once stitched her broken heart back together. She contacted a local publisher, unsure of what to expect. The book was released under the title The Bluebird Letters, part memoir, part journal, part guide to starting again. It found a quiet, devoted readership. Women who had loved too long, stayed too long, lost too much. Readers wrote to her saying, You wrote my story. Blue didn't need recognition. She needed truth, and she had told hers. There was a time she thought it was over for her, that love had closed its doors. But love, as she had learned, doesn't always arrive on time. Sometimes it shows up when you've stopped waiting, when you've finally come home to yourself. And maybe you, yes, you reading this, have been there too. Maybe you're still in the leaving, or the hurting, or the healing. If so, you're not alone. Leave your story in the comments. Share your heartbreak, your resilience, your rediscovery of joy. You never know who might read it and find the strength to begin again, because second chances are real, and so is love. The end.
Hi, please click on the subscribe button and maybe leave a comment. Thanks.